So what I want to do right now is I want to talk to you guys about how you tell a reason from a conclusion. If you're going to do logical analysis, if you're going to try to evaluate an argument to tell whether or not it's a good argument, the first thing you need to do is you need to figure out what's being used to prove what. And this is one of many cases where, unfortunately, it's kind of hard to come up with a really, really hard and fast rule. A lot of times you're just going to have to use, you're going to have to use your own judgment. But there are a couple of things that you can do that help. And the first thing to do would be to look for what we call inference indicators. Inference indicators are words like therefore, because, hence, so, whereas. All of these point to reasoning. Take the words because and therefore. These are the two most obvious. Because is what we would call a reason indicator. And what that means is when you see the word because, what follows is usually going to be a reason for something. It's usually going to be evidence that something else is true. Therefore is what we'd call a conclusion indicator. When you see therefore, what follows the word therefore is almost always going to be a conclusion drawn from something else. Now notice I said almost always. There are exceptions. And of course there are tons of other words that do this as well. Words like since and whereas, and I've already mentioned those. Anyway, so the point is when you see these words, they help you to see a little bit about how the argument takes shape. If you see the word because, it's a fair bet that what follows is a reason. So try that. Ask yourself if that looks like it might be a reason to believe something else in the text. If you see the word therefore, ask yourself, does it look like that's a conclusion? Maybe it won't sometimes, but mostly that should work. So, for example, I'm going to use my old textbook from when I was an undergraduate, Hurley's Logic, and got a couple of good examples here. How about, here's one that's attributed to Arum Stroll and Richard Popkin from The Philosophy of the Human Spirit. Since the good, according to Plato, is that which furthers a person's real interests, it follows that, in any given case, when the good is known, men will seek it. So in an argument like that, you could look at the word since. That's a reason indicator. It tells you what follows as a reason. It follows that. That's a conclusion indicator. That tells you what follows is going to be a conclusion. Okay, so here's another one from Ralph Erickson and Wendy Kuhn-Silk in The Kinematics of Plant Growth. Like a flame or the wake of a boat, the form of a plant changes slowly, but the components are in continual flux. The motion of the components can therefore be analyzed in terms of fluid flow. The word therefore, that's a conclusion indicator. So what does that mean? It means very likely that what follows is a conclusion drawn from everything that came before. That's not always going to be the case, but always try that explanation first. Here's another example from William Shakespeare. Neither a borrower nor a lender be, for loan oft loses both itself and a friend, and borrowing dulls the edge of husbandry. For is a reason indicator. So the point is, if you're trying to tell what's a reason from what's a conclusion, look for these words and always try out the idea that something that looks like it's a reason indicator is showing you that the thing that follows will be a reason. Something that looks like a conclusion indicator is showing you whatever follows is probably going to be a conclusion. Now, there are a couple key exceptions. One of these is that sometimes inference indicators appear in explanatory text. So, for example, you could use the word because not as a way of saying, here I'm giving you a reason for a conclusion, but as a way of saying, here's why I think that one thing happened. So, for example, you might wonder why this book is missing its cover. And if I were to say, well, it's missing its cover because I used this book a lot and eventually it just wore off, in that case, you might be tempted to look at the argument and say, it looks like reasoning. Okay, the book is missing its cover because Dan used it a lot. But I'm not really trying to prove, in that case, that the book is missing its cover. You can see that it's missing its cover. What I'm doing is I'm explaining it. So sometimes inference indicators will be used not as an effort to produce an argument in favor of something, but as a way of explaining why something that we already believe to be true is actually the case. Another example would be the word since. The word since is often used as a reason indicator, but it can also be used in reference to time. So for example, if I were to say, well, up here in Barrow, we haven't seen nighttime since mid-May, in a case like that, I'm not introducing a reason and describing something that's been true ever since that time. The word since, particularly in reference to time, wouldn't be used as an inference indicator. So when you first start analyzing an argument, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to look for inference indicators. And if you can't tell anything else about an argument, if you find the internal structure of the argument kind of confusing, just start with those. If you see the word because, test out the idea that it's followed by a reason. If you see the word therefore, test out the idea that it's followed by a conclusion. You can do that with any number of other inference indicators, and that's a good starting point. It's not going to solve all your questions about what's being used as evidence for what, but it often gives you enough clues at the beginning of an argument that you can get started.